Welcome to the Midwestern Method Podcast. So today I am interviewing Casper Muellen. Casper is a breathworker, biohacker, author, all kinds of awesome stuff. We had a really great conversation. I think you're going to love today's podcast. I would like to invite you to take a look at our sponsors. Of course, we are sponsored by Mandala Chocolate, the most delicious and nutritious chocolate on the market. Don't forget to go to Mandala Chocolate and take a look at my link below in the show notes or in the information box below for more on that. Also, head on over to, if you're looking for CBD, if you're into CBD, they have topicals, they've got the tinctures and all kinds of awesome stuff over at Dream Nutrition. Take a look at that. Use my discount code for 5% off any purchase that you make. Also, if you haven't joined the Patreon club, what are you doing? Join it. It's a lot of fun. We have a lot of fun every month. I add breathwork routines, new sessions, and a lot of times I'll be teaching you new techniques. And it's all done via Patreon. It's incredibly inexpensive to join, and it really helps keep everything that I'm doing going. So I really do appreciate all of those who are already Patreon members. I really appreciate it. And if you haven't joined, come on, let's join in, join the fun, and get to some breathing. So without any further ado, I hope you enjoy the show today. Welcome to the Midwest. My name is Jesse, and I'm here with Casper Muellen. Casper is a very special person to me. Casper is a mentor of sorts for me, actually. Back whenever I was going through my master training for Wim Hof method, Casper was really the guy that, for me, translated a lot of the stuff that Wim Hof was saying. Of course, if you've ever listened to Wim, you know, sometimes it's a little hard to understand. And Casper was really good about really translating what's going on in the body, in the mind, all of these things for Wim Hof method. Now, Casper has gone on to other things as well. He's published a book, Mind Lift. I would show you my copy because I normally do that, but I just moved, so it's in a box somewhere, so you'll have to pardon me for that. But anyway, Casper is author, speaker, breath worker. You've been doing some really cool stuff actually lately with master classes in breath. And actually, I just want to start right there, Casper. I've seen some really cool pictures of, it looks like lungs, actual body parts that you're so how did you manage to get access? At first I thought it was human lungs, and I was like, oh my God, over there in Europe they just have access to everything. But anyway, thanks again so much for being on the podcast, Casper. And but yeah, could you just, what is the stuff that you're doing right now with those master classes in breath work?
Yeah, it's funny because there's two unique selling points, and one of them is microdosing psychedelic mushrooms, and the other one is dissecting animal organs. Those are the only two unique selling points. It's just like the ones that stick out.
You're gonna get high a little bit, and you get to play with some organs. So
yeah, so one of the people who attended, they're like, I can't believe I ate magic mushrooms and then blew into a sheep lung on the same day. So that kind of became the tagline. But there's much more going on. A good friend of mine is a biologist. We studied together, and she has a family that works in the University of veterinarian studies. So that
awesome.
allowed me access. So yeah, I've basically created this masterclass where I try to leverage all of the great connections I have and the great opportunities I have to learn and to teach into like a 5-day course that kind of tries to bring it all together. And what's really amazing is in the last, let's say 5 to 6 years, since I got into the world of breath work, there's been this convergence where things are just coming together. And from the very start, I've always been very adamant about teaching principles over methods. Now, the methods are kind of the delivery mechanisms, and it just so happens that the Wim Hof method I still think is the most powerful delivery method. It's kind of, some people call it the gateway drug into the world of breathing.
Yeah.
Where Wim, as a genius, just kind of blew the lid off all the secrecy and all the mystery around breathing. And he was like, "Listen, this is the technique. Do it. It's free, and boom, go with it." And the whole world was like, "Oh, that's refreshing. That's not fake or weird." Well, a lot of it is very weird, but I mean, not in a way where
yeah,
it's kind of, but it's amazing. And so yeah, and after I spent some years teaching the instructor's course, and also like I've always been very much into all the different, like I study in all different directions, and I want to learn everything at the same time. And I just went into the rabbit hole of breathing specifically for a long time, and I just noticed that everywhere I came to talk about mindset, talk about self-optimization and biohacking, I would always end up using breathwork tools because they were the most powerful ways to kind of hack into the nervous system and help people manage their states. And after a few years of experimenting and just going in every possible direction and following the yogic and the scientific and everything in between, I was like, yeah, I want to share this with the world. And especially because a very large part of my audience either works as a coach, as a yoga teacher, fitness instructors, in the health and sports world, or aspire to be coaches in that world. I was like, I have now a kind of like a load of work, of knowledge and understanding and experience that I want to share with people that really resonate with that, but in a very open way, where it's not about this is the specific, this is this technique, and that is that method, and that is this, little thing, but to kind of open the whole thing and just look at the principles and be like, listen, these are the core principles, and once you get those, you can understand and apply every possible breathing method. And I'm just a total nerd for kind of like, I used to, if a VCR would break as a kid, my mom, I'd come home and she'd like, I have a surprise for you. And I was like,
boy.
Is it a present? And she was like, no, it's a broken VCR. And I was like, yeah.
You were that kid.
Yeah, and I would take it apart and like I'd bring like dead animals home and I cut them open. And that's what I've been doing with breathing techniques and with kind of like the human experience, just to kind of open up this, see how it works. So yeah, that's kind of how that came together. And the reason I do it in the Netherlands now is because I have access to like the dissection lab and the psychedelic truffles, and it's good stuff.
Yeah. And that's the thing, because I think the thing about breathing is one of those things that for the longest time, I had no idea that was, a thing at all. It was like, okay, of course I breathe. And whenever I, exercise, I breathe harder. And, there's that kind of, I get the fact that this is a thing, but the fact that one can modulate that and have some kind of an effect that is a profound effect was kind of a mystery to me. I didn't even know, cold training, breath work, and all those things. But I think you're calling Wim Hof method a gateway drug. I completely resonate with that. Whenever you do your classes now you have a background as a science teacher, as I recall, isn't that right?
Yeah.
And so you've come quite a ways from that. Is it something that you still see yourself as, fulfilling that same kind of a role as a teacher, or, do you see yourself as an athlete, or?
No, not at all. No, definitely started to come full circle. And like when I started doing this whole career thing that I'm doing now, and like a lot of public speaking, a lot of workshops and seminars and intensives and retreats, I didn't really brand myself as a science teacher, because science teacher sounds like something you have in school, and it sounds like something you certainly do not want to pay and go visit.
Yeah, right.
And it's weird, because to me, teachers are superheroes, right? And not the teachers I had, but a real teacher is a real, like the truest superhero we have in modern times, much like nurses, for example. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I come from a family that is just filled with teachers and nurses, and usually people teaching nursing.
Okay.
I'm biased in that sense. Yeah, but now I'm starting to kind of call myself a science teacher again, because that's what I'm doing, you know, and in this, and I've done a lot of kind of like high-end coaching, and I work with like these CEO networks and professional athletes, and then it's kind of like cool to kind of brand as like this high-end performance coach. But what it comes down to is I basically still teach science, but in a very different way, like the science of self-mastery and self-optimization. But the whole point is to kind of explain to people how it works without getting caught up in the specifics of it, and really trying to lift the veil a little bit to see, yeah, what's behind, what are the knobs and levers of how this stuff works. But when I left the education system, or actually when the last years that I worked in the education system, I realized that the things that I was doing, the amount of like people skills and classroom management and walking into a room and setting a tone, having an influence on people that were, or at least creating a setting, and a setting, a scenario within which you can be of positive influence in somebody's lives. These are all core skills that you train as a teacher if you walk that path. I mean, there's plenty of teachers who do the exact same thing for 40 years. It never really works, but they also don't really fuck up. So they kind of like just do their thing. But the real like teachers, they've got so many amazing qualities. And I just realized that maybe I can do the same type of things, which is basically just getting in front of a room, telling stories, making bad jokes, giving some insight in a setting jokes. Where I have in a setting where I have more freedom, you know, and more influence also, because as you know, in the education system, you're always, or at least I was always bouncing into the walls of that system and going like, okay, so where can I really innovate, and where can I really make a difference? And funnily enough, one of the kids in my class, because I was always the kind of teacher I wanted to be, like, you can do anything you want and the world is yours, and go out there and make the world a better place. Yeah. And then one of the kids was like, yeah, but you can tell us all of that, but you're just a teacher. And I was like, ouch. What was that? And then I was like, what? And he was like, yeah, you're telling us to go out into the world and make it a better place. And you're still just here. You're still just doing this job. And I was like, whoa. Damn, that kind of like hit me hard. But in a way, I was like, yeah, it's true. Maybe I should go out there and really see whether this stuff works, the things that I'm working with. And that's what I've been doing. But I definitely want to get back to education, and I have a lot of opportunity right now to do that in a way where I can really stick to my core values and try to add something good there. So it's always been a part of my mission.
Yeah, that's awesome. And when people come to you, is there a specific, I don't know, do you have a specific group of people that come to you specifically to learn, you know, hey, I want to become a better athlete? Or is there a specific path that people are generally looking to learn? Or what does a typical client look like for you?
Well, I don't really have, so right now it's mainly coaches and speakers, people who want to learn to be coaches. This is now my main audience. And I had this period where I would just go wherever I was invited. And I was like, I suddenly find myself in this life where people listen to me.
Oh my
God. Book with my name on it. Yeah, it's weird. And for some reason, what I'm doing seems to be working. So I'm just gonna take this, surrender into this experiment, and be like, whenever somebody invites me to do anything, I'll just say yes. And I ended up like working with Olympic athletes and with like the special forces. But the core question is usually originally the question was always, how can we get more performance? That's what people were looking for. And people were like, oh, we've heard that maybe through like mental training or through breathing, we can maybe like increase performance a little bit. And so I was really getting a lot of people in, like, for example, like a professional rugby player who would just always get winded halfway through a sprint, and he's like, my muscles are stronger, I know I can do more than this, but I never have the full range. And then, you know, I kind of like tried to figure out what went wrong, and I was like, I'll look at you, and I don't know what's gonna happen. I'll just look at it, and then I would see how they breathe and how they worked and what their kind of nervous system was tuned to perform like, and I could usually find this weak link in the chain, and then like, to my great surprise, in a very quick and simple way, fix this. And then they would go on and like add 20 or 30% onto their performance, or like finish the sprint without getting winded. And I was like, oh damn, this stuff is working. So there's a lot. And then, it's just like word of mouth going from there to there. And like athletes, generally, it depends. You have these very traditional athletic kind of paradigms, where they're like, we've been winning gold for ages in this specific way, and this is how we're going to do it. And they end up actually breaking a lot of good, healthy young people to fit into that gold medal paradigm. Yeah. But there's also sports and places where people are willing to think outside the box. So, for example, in CrossFit and in MMA, this is a sport where it's relatively young. There's not an ancient paradigm, and they're just like, "Hey, give me 3% performance gains, and I mean, and that's like, I'll do whatever you want." Yeah, that's more than enough. Yeah. Especially in like the top 5% of performance, with professional athletes. If they're like, if I can get to sleep 10 minutes earlier, if I can digest my food better, if I can have like 5 more steps. I mean, in an MMA setting, if you have 5 more seconds of quality breathing, which means you have self-awareness and control, that is the win.
Right.
So it kind of spread like that, and people started finding me, and I always have this feeling of like, who am I to even talk to like an Olympic swimmer? Like, a professional athlete is out of breath professionally 20 hours a week. Who am I to tell them what to do? I don't know. Like a lot of these sports, the rugby player that came over, I didn't even know what the terms were. Like, do you call it a ball? Is it like a field? Is it like kicking? And
there's points involved somewhere, right? Yeah.
There's some kind of points, and and that also helped me to kind of like not be in their world. I was like, so basically you kick a ball into the right direction, people cheer, and you get money, right?
Right. There's something. I get the basics. Yeah.
And you want to be better at that. Okay, let's look at what's going on. So I've tried to be very open and very like not have necessarily an agenda or an idea of where these people need to get. And that was very helpful, because that allowed me to just look at the human in front of me and to ask, how did this human work? And what I started to notice really early on is that there was a lot of usually emotional, mental struggles kind of locked up into the behavior of the nervous system. So I started to point out like, hey, if this person kind of like pulls up this muscle under this amount of tension, then that tells me more about how their nervous system is primed than about whether that muscle functions properly or not. So to really look at kind of like what's going on there, and to be able to explain that in a bit more of a scientific way of what's going on, and then to increase the tone, for example, of the parasympathetic nervous system, and then the pain would go away, or the injury would go away. And that also led me to a lot of work with a more high-end, kind of like high-power CEO type of crowd, who arguably are performance people. And this is the interesting thing. What I saw with most of the people who are considered to be high performers, they perform high at a very specific thing, but they perform extremely low at being human. So it's like, you can run a multi-million-dollar company, but can you sleep? Can you digest? I was like, I like at some point I said, I don't know. I hope you can censor me if you want, but I always ask them like, can you sleep, shit, and fuck? That's can you do that? And it's
these are important things in life. Yeah.
And that's the thing. Like, I'm a biology teacher, and when you talk about biology, it always comes down. Everything comes down to reproducing and digesting. That's kind of like and sleeping, of course. So So if these people ask me like, how can I, at the end of the afternoon, how can I have more focus and be like, after my lunch, not have this dip, and not need like 5 espressos to keep kicking ass for 1 more hour? And they're like, okay, so you want that 5% performance gain, but can you perform the basic functions of being a human? And which is, can you get to sleep? Can you wake up with energy? But especially, can you be intimate with your family? Can you have intimate moments of family time when you get home? Do you actually, and this is not even about performing in the bedroom when I talk about intimacy, can you actually come home, put your bag down, and look your spouse in the eye and have a moment of connection? Can you hug your kids when you come home without thinking of the 20 to-dos that you're doing? Because those are the most core human functions. And then you see that a lot of the high performance lifestyle is taking away is kind of like borrowing from humanness, and then at
Yeah.
some point you're going to hit a wall, and then you're going to have to, sit with that and fix that. So that has led me to be less about, improving performance, and more about let's build a stronger base where your nervous system is capable of actually coming down into this parasympathetic ventral vagal state where you can recover and you can rest and you can be social. And that has been the most interesting thing to me, to see that everybody that we societally kind of put on pedestals of, they have this amazing performance, athletes and singers and business people, a lot of times they don't really, they kind of forget what it is to just be human. And it's been very interesting to work with this kind of crowds.
Yeah, because so much of what I see is adapting to the life of just modernity, modern life in itself, adapting this, I always say we're using the same, basic make and model of the first humans, that came off the line, and we're in this completely different environment. And you're excelling at something that's not anything close to hunting and gathering, whether it's running a business or it's, kicking a ball through a hoop or something like that. It's completely different from kind of what we originally were evolved to live in. So trying to take this, really to take all of those things that were naturally evolved to help us, live in nature, and then we're in a completely different environment. I think that's one of the hardest things for high performing people to do, for anybody to do, really. I mean, if you take a look at just the average person, we're following a lot of our, internal, biological needs. I want sweet, I want salty, and you can see the effects on people's health. So yeah, it's really a holistic thing. And so those are some of the principles that you teach as well as breathing then. Is that right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you can't outrun evolution, and we've been primed, we've been built in a certain way. And I was very lucky to be introduced to these concepts very early on in life, because both my grandfather and my parents worked with tribes. My grandfather even worked with entirely untouched tribes.
Wow.
Yeah, and it was part of his job to make first contact with
I didn't know
tribes.
that.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
It's an interesting story, because my grandfather was a doctor in the tropics, and of course this is a very, very dark page in Western history, in Dutch history specifically, but this was at the end of colonization, and also now with of course the whole racial equality debate going. I'm very happy that it's finally happening. I've been very much raised with this awareness, which I'm grateful for. It's always been a kind of struggle. It's a different discussion, but it's interesting because there's a whole part of history, and there's so many like big truths that are fully being withheld from the mass population in so many ways. And I'm not even talking about a conspiracy theory type of thing, but it's just like, for example, this is something I've always been aware of, because my mother grew up until she was 12 in a Papua village, right? She grew up with tribes of people that were before never met by any Western civilizations.
Wow.
And of course, the Dutch have a long history of colonization, and this was the end of that phase where the colonies were all kind of being colonization was ended, and every colony needed to kind of be returned to another government or to change things. And my grandfather had just come out of Second World War. He was very sick during the Second World War, and then he finished his medical degree, and he wanted to be of the best possible service to the health of the world. He was like, the world, there's so much going on. He had just been through war, and he knew, and this is something that it's inspiring to me, because he was very young. He'd just been through war, and then he heard these messages of like, we have one of our last colonies, and they need to be helped because they have it very rough. And basically the short story is, I won't go into the history lesson, but the short story is that the Dutch were going to leave there, but they were like, these people come from a completely different lifestyle. We need to make sure they have civilization because if we just leave these tribal people there, then they don't have any grounds upon which to decide their future. This was kind of like the argument of the Dutch, and they were like, we need to stay there for a few years, and we need to give them infrastructure and education. We need to make sure that they have kind of the gifts of civilization, so we don't just leave them in a shithole. Well, which ended up actually leaving it an even worse shithole. But I won't go into that part of the history lesson just for now. Just kind of like to make the point is that my grandfather was like, I need to help people. I have a medical degree. And even though he was living in a war-torn country in the Netherlands, he heard these people have it even worse. And he was like, I'm going to go there. I'm going to help. And I'm going to be of service. And it was his job to make contact with the tribes and to do a population count and to do kind of like a health check. Like, what are these people like? How do they live? Not what do they like, but more like, not as an anthropologist, but more of like, okay, what's their current state of health? And what do we need to provide them with in order to give them the gifts of medical civilization?
Sure.
So he went there with a very strong mission. And then he got there and he was like, but these people are healthy and strong. And because he was like, they live in the most horrible circumstances. Right. They have it's primitive and they don't have roads and churches and schools and
they have it so bad. Yeah.
They must be suffering. And he got there and he just found like these powerful, strong people. And these were warrior tribes and shamanistic tribes. And he was like, these people aren't savage. What's going on? Like, this is they're the furthest away from savage. And what he saw also is that the more they had been in touch with civilization, the worse they were doing. Because they were eating the wrong shoes. They were eating the wrong food and they were wearing shoes and they were like going to school instead of being outside in the forest. And he was like, whoa, we got it all wrong. This is crazy.
Oh my God. Yeah.
So he would actually, for example, like some things he would be very good at, like mending a broken bone or curing an infection with antibiotics, like this stuff. And he had like painkillers but he also saw healing practices for things that he had no idea you could even heal these things, and also he saw there was even in the modern or in like right after the Second World War, which is a long time ago, but even then there were health problems in the West that he was seeing in his practice that he wasn't seeing among these tribes. They were powerful, they were strong, they were inspired, and he was like way into their lifestyle and they were his friends and he learned from them and he was like, whoa, I have to learn from these people. And then eventually politics fucked up and it was a big mess. There was a war. My grandfather actually fled the country because there was a war starting. So my mother actually came to the Netherlands as a war refugee. So she knows what being a refugee is like in that way, because they were like dropped in the ocean. They had to get on a cruise ship, like a whole thing. Anyway, my grandfather then went on a mission to figure out where our true medical knowledge had gone. Because he was like, listen, these people live in a forest. They have no books, nothing, and they know more about healing than I do, and I've been medically trained with all the books in the world. What's going on? And then he actually started to kind of like do the history research, and even tracing back to diaries of people's great grandmothers, and he traced that all back to the witch hunt, where in a patriarchal Christian society, having women who live freely on their own, who have power because they have healing modalities, you can't have that. So they were fucking burned at the stake, right? By the hundreds. the true holistic medicine. And I saw this protest sign of a woman holding a sign saying, "We are the great granddaughters of the witches you couldn't burn." And that's like one of the most inspiring things. It's like goosebumps. Anyway, so the point is that I was raised with these stories, with the stories of tribes with healing modalities, and the stories of how very recently, in the last 100 or 200 years, the most horrible things went on in relation to things like slavery and colonization. I mean, my mother grew up in a colony, right? She knows what it's like to live that life. So I've always had a closeness to that. But with that, also the awareness that our modern Western life, first of all, isn't the optimal human life in many ways, and also is borrowed. Not only borrowed from our past, from exploitation in that sense, that also, of course, but it's also borrowed from our own well-being and our own health. We basically borrow comfort
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
certainty, or an illusion of certainty, from our own actual well-being and our truest purpose. And actually, my mother went when she was, as soon as she was 18, she went then to Central Africa. She met my dad there, and she was a nurse. My dad was a physiotherapist, and like my dad would build prosthetics from trash, and they worked with the Maasai tribes. So by the time I was born, we lived in Western Africa, and I've always grown up around tribal art and around like the picture books, which I'd always go through, and like I'd always want to learn about this stuff. So this hunter-gatherer principle has been very real to me, especially since I wasn't able to apply it because I used to be like fat and sick and depressed and miserable.
You've got to send me a picture of the before Casper, so that I got to show it, because I'm just letting everybody know. And I'm gonna, if you send this to me, and I'm gonna pressure you to send it to me. I got to say, the before Casper looks 10 years older than you look now. Like it is it really is amazing transformation. Just really with a lot of these things, when it comes to breath work or a lot of the holistic medicines or plant medicine and things like that, I think one of the obstacles we do face is the fact that it seems so foreign and so to Western mind, the woo woo, that it's like, no, it can't be this. It can't be that, because I know this other method. This is the, this is how it's done. You take the pill, and this is, it seems so different. A lot of times we have to overcome that. And
yeah, absolutely.
Is that something that, how do you help people overcome that kind of mistrust? Because I mean, I love that story you just told. I mean, so much wisdom from like ancient cultures, we're just now kind of just starting to tap into and say, well, what was going on here? Is that, how do you get people to kind of like get over the hump? It's like, no, dude, that's too woo woo for me.
Yeah.
Do you get a lot of pushback that way?
No.
No.
And I think
Awesome.
This is one of the things that I've been able to do with my background in science teaching.
Yeah.
And like teenagers have the most amazing ability to be skeptical and to question everything. But if you are real and if you're authentic, they'll be like, cool, got you. So you can be from a completely different, and I used to work with many different groups, because I was a science teacher, like kind of like a high school science, European version of high school science teacher. For 3 days a week, and then the other days I would teach workshops, music workshops with kids all over the place, and that brought me to a lot of different places. And for example, in far less privileged areas, I used to work with like really like troubled, like street kids, basically. I used to work with mentally and physically disabled children. So I kind of had this feedback mechanism of I have to show. There's two roads you can take as a teacher.
Okay.
You can borrow authority.
Yes.
You can play the game of authority. You can pretend that authority is a real thing. Yeah.
Right.
And you can hope to rely on that. And then every time that you come in with like, I am the teacher, you must listen to me. And every time you get away with it, you're just getting away with it.
That's
as soon as one kid finds out that is not true and that you can't hold up to it, you're done, right?
Yeah.
Or the other route is you show up real and authentic, which doesn't mean you have to tell them your life story or whatever, that you have to be friends, but you show up real and authentic, and you be like, this is me. I don't know everything, but let's figure it out together. And then you will always get some kind of, they will show you realness back, even if they have no idea where you're coming from. So that to me was an amazing feedback mechanism, where every time if I would pretend, it wouldn't come across. At the same time, though, as a teacher, you learn to adjust the packaging of your message to different levels of thinking, to different levels of language, to different age groups, to different everythings. And that is such a superpower that teachers get, is that as soon as you talk to somebody for a minute, you have already kind of an understanding of how you're going to package whatever message you have in a way that it serves them. So it's not about putting on a mask and putting on a show in order to please an audience. No, it's about how can they receive it. So I realized very early on that I needed to take the Western scientific language route. So I kind of, it's about meeting people where they are. And honestly,
Yeah.
if I'm completely honest, in
Yeah.
the recent year or two, is the first times where I would every now and then have people be like, "Oh, that's too woo woo for me." Oh, you're going to talk
Oh,
about
really?
this
Yeah.
yoga, yeah. And it's because I've just been very accustomed to having my own audience. And if
Yeah.
I come up and I start talking about a spiritual principle, or I start talking about energetic principles,
Yeah.
or about shamanic things, because now more and more, if you look at the tribal healing, there's
Hmm.
a role of a shaman. And
Yeah.
if I come and with my own audience, I've had the luxury of having my own audience who gets it. I can just
Yeah.
get up and make a fart joke, and then talk about the
Right.
core of the
Right.
universe, and then talk about your soul, and then talk about science, and go in all directions.
You got to have the
So,
fart joke first, and then that leads into the
exactly.
cosmos. Yeah.
So it's like almost like a formula where it's like scientific fact, something you didn't know, a
Right.
fart joke, another
Yeah.
scientific fact. So
That's
yeah,
teaching.
I think it's very important for teachers and coaches of all kinds, is to learn to speak the different languages. Because sometimes I'm, for example, in front of a yoga crowd.
Right.
I love the yoga crowd.
Yeah.
That's my people in many ways, and
Yeah.
I can go the chakra route. I can talk about that,
Right.
and I can link it to the scientific. But a lot of times I'm in front of businesses and corporates, and kind of like a room full of gray suits, and then I know which words to use. And what I realized very early on, and I also have the Wim Hof method to thank to this, is that it's a very visceral, real, kind of hardcore subjective experience to
Yeah.
work with ice, to work with breath.
Oh, yeah.
And what I saw Wim do very early on when I was working with him, even before he was much more known than he is now, people would be skeptical, because he just shows up Wim. He just shows up real. And that's something that I really learned from him, like show up completely real. And he would be like unfiltered, real Wim. And some people would be like, I don't know, this is kind of woo, this is kind of weird. And after the ice bath, they'd be like, whoa.
Right.
Whatever had just happened, I experienced something very real. And I think that bringing the body, the real visceral experience, this primal experience, back into practice in the modern world, that is what gives people this feeling of like, I don't know how it works, I don't know what it is, but I feel that I need to do this. So I think that's an important thing.
Yeah, really having that experience, because I was just like you, especially early on. Of course, when I found the Wim Hof method, I was scrolling through. I was starting with meditation, and my joke is always that meditation is the easiest thing in the world. You sit there and don't think about anything, right? Which is ridiculous, right? I mean, it's really hard to clear your mind and really to not think about anything, or to let that peace come over you. And so I was scrolling through the internet. I saw an article. It said, learn to influence your immune system consciously. I said, that sounds like bullshit. Click. I had to click it. And then, and so then there was this is Wim early on, and really there was nothing on the internet about Wim Hof at this time, at least, especially in the States. We hadn't heard anything about it. It was probably the only thing in English that was about Wim Hof on the internet at the time. And so I was reading it, and there was it talked about the PNAS study, and so it all sounded ridiculous, and I planned to pass judgment and move on, with my life. But then I did the breathing, technique, and I was like, oh my God, what, and that's the thing with all breath work, and especially cold exposure, a lot of these things, a lot of it is just when you experience it, like you said, there's a subjective truth, all the numbers and the figures. There's a lot of science out there that proves doing a lot of things work, but when you can feel it right then and there, I think that's the thing that really separated it from everything else from me. And so then of course, continuing the practice. And then of course I got to meet you, and you put me in a frozen lake, and I'll never forget, this frozen lake experience. Here I was out in Colorado, and with a bunch of people that I knew to some degree, right? You know, I'd met them and we kind of knew each other, but I was like, oh my God, Jesse, you just joined a cult, dude. You joined a cult. What are you doing here? But you know, the thing is, after that, you know, the years that have passed after teaching the method and breath work and a lot of things to, you know, hundreds of people, you see, wow, there is that real impact that you're making. And like you were saying, you know, just trying to share it because it changed my life, you know, just in huge ways. You know, I had,
Yeah, one thing that I got really interested in is just generally state management and being more and more directed and specific at how we can kind of tease out certain states from the nervous system. And this is really what I've been focusing on the last few years, is to find very specific patterns and rhythms of breathing that almost guaranteed trigger a certain state in people.
Well,
so
as I recall, you and we have something in common, that we dabbled in drugs and alcohol quite a bit earlier on. And I think that is that self-medication, right? You're trying to do state management, obviously with negative consequences, but yeah, you can do that other ways as well. And that's, I think, what's so exciting to me.
I think the problem with like state regulation through substances is that you're not really learning a skill. Now there are there's many skills you learn. There's some things that come in handy. But I mean, if you use, so there's definitely ways to do it. So in the biohacking community, there's lots of proper directed and skillful use of things that, you know, 20 years ago would have put you, still would put you in jail in many places.
Yeah. Where I live in the Midwest, it's still illegal.
Yeah, it's like cannabis and psychedelic substances, which I have free use of. Well, not free, but I mean, the rules are much better here.
Gonna have to come visit.
And if you use it in a very, if you use it in a very conscious way, you know exactly what you're doing, then you're being skillful in your self-regulation, and then they're just tools, right? It's always the human behavior, not the substance. But the one of the reasons that substance abuse instead of proper use is such a pitfall for the human mind is because it gives you this sense of relief without having to first acquire this big skill. And with breathing is, of course, and meditation and like this mental training, and I've also done a lot of like self-hypnosis and other kind of like mental stuff. There's a learning curve, and you're gonna have to re-ingrain all patterns and keep working with it. And there's a really big investment in time and energy and intention. And so it's not the easiest route, but I think self-regulation is the only real skill that we need in the 21st century, the ability to understand that I am a system, I am a physiological system, and I am primed through millions of years of evolution to respond to certain stimuli in a certain way. That's just how I work, right? Yeah. And this is also, if you look at addiction from that perspective, then I have absolutely zero judgment on anybody with any addiction, because first of all, I know what it's like to a degree. And also, if you really look at what addiction is, it's not about being weak or about being a loser, but no, it's just, if you look at how the human system works and how it is kind of primed and built evolutionarily, subconsciously to respond to certain environments in a certain way, then addiction makes perfect sense. Like addiction, the kind of addiction epidemic, the obesity epidemic, the depression epidemic, all of those things I see as symptoms of a far larger problem.
Exactly.
The fact that we're out of touch with our nature.
I call it whispers from your Neolithic grandmother. We're getting it through our DNA, and you know, because she's like, hey, there's sugar. Eat as much as you can, because we're out in the Serengeti. We're gonna there's not much of that in existence. There's salt. Oh yeah, load up on that. Because these are all things that at one time were in scarce supply.
Yes, and here's an interesting thing that could also create the assumption that our hunter-gatherer ancestors would then splurge on whatever they had whenever they had it, but also that they wouldn't do, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
they would
That's a good
also
point.
have a culture of modesty and a culture of, and there's a really good book called Humankind. It's written by a Dutch historian. It's one of the best books I've ever written. And he actually really nicely describes, Rutger Bregman is his name, which is Rutger Bregman would be the Bregman would be the word. But anyway, this tied so much together for me because he actually described this principle that shame used to be a very positive emotion because it was used to make sure that a certain amount of modesty would be preferred behavior, and that if you don't have that modesty and you splurge or you steal or you amass a lot of possessions, then you would feel shame as a feedback mechanism that would move you away from this modesty, right? From overabundance. And that would be a self-regulating system in small tribes that worked really well, which of course means that the more shameless you are, the more capable you are of gaining a lot of authority and a lot of wealth and a lot of stuff. And actually, so it seems that the world leaders, the most powerful people in the world, they show the lowest amount of shame if you study them. And I don't want to say any names, but you Americans know a guy.
might be able to think of somebody, right? Okay. Yeah.
And so it's I think there's definitely two things that are involved. There's this tribal evolution, of this ancestral evolution of, yes, we are primed to crave sugar and salty and protein, and we're primed to have this inherent laziness inside of us where we always have to think how much, if I'm going to invest calories, how many am I going to get back?
Right.
But also societally, we have to respect our ancestors in the sense that tribal communities who would thrive, they would also have a set of behaviors. They would have a mindset that would allow them to thrive because of their minimalism and their modesty, and because of their willingness to share whatever they had, right? And it wouldn't be, if most cultures that have been able to read about and that have been studied, they wouldn't like splurge and go out, right? So that's also something that there's a giant behavioral aspect in learning how to inhibit your behavior in relation to these responses, because we don't really have the option to fully change our environment, right? You can remove negative information or negative people from your life and all these things, but we still live in a modern world, which we should. I think we should. Yeah. The modern world is awesome. I'm talking to you.
Right, exactly.
This is going through space, isn't this
makes
crazy?
It all possible. Yeah, you're living in the future right now. I just woke up, and it's true. The afternoon.
It's almost dinner time here.
Like there's a flux capacitor here somewhere, probably. I don't know, but I'm glad to be living in this day and age.
Exactly. Yeah, no, absolutely. But now it's about bringing it together, I think. And in order, and what I love about breath is that I think you always have to start from the base. Like, what is the core function of human life? Well, it's breathing, right? If you stop breathing, you stop living. It's very simple like that. And of course, if you look at it from a more spiritual perspective, which is interesting, like what is even before that? Why would we even be alive to breathe? Well, then there's, it depends on who you talk to. There's different words for it, but there's a purpose. There's a soul yearning. There's a sacredness to life. There's a whole reason why we even get to take that first breath. And I don't know the reason, and I'm not religious in any formal way, shape, or form. But that is also another question that we don't really ask anymore. And actually, especially in religions, that question isn't asked a lot, because in religions, the last thing you do is question, right? But that whole question of why are we even here to breathe in the first place? What am I doing here? What is my life about? I think that's also such an important thing that we need to get back in touch with. And this is another thing that seems to be one of the core factors of human life. In tribal settings, they would all have something bigger. They would all have an awareness of something far greater. And even though one tribe would believe that the squirrels are holy, and the other tribe believed that the sky was holy, and the other one believed that you had to like take a shit under a specific tree in order to get good crops, or whatever it is.
I was part of that religion. Yeah.
All of those things seem like random and futile to us, but it's really not about the rituals. It is about the understanding that there's something greater going on. And that we don't have probably not even the slightest clue right now what that is for most of us. And I think that's a wonderful thing to just have that not knowing, but kind of like at least a desire to also strive to understand or to learn this.
You sound like a guy that might be fun to microdose with and talk about the deeper parts of the cosmos. So as far as your life, I mean, and applying, I mean, you've got a great depth of knowledge, and I just, one of the things I love about you is that you're constantly learning and adding to that knowledge. How do you apply it just on a regular daily basis? I'm always curious. And of course, I watch your Instagram, you know, I see these awesome Instagram posts. I saw the one about a hug the other day, you know, hugging Dr. Trish, who gives the best hugs, just got to say.
She's the hug winner.
Yeah.
That's the pro.
So what does your average day look like? You know, are you microdosing on a regular basis? Is this something, you know, I'm sure you have somewhat of a regular process for your breath work. I don't know, you know, I'm always fascinated by, you know, people's daily routines, or do you even have a daily routine, or is it?
Well, it's an interesting point, because I don't really have a average day anymore.
Oh, okay.
Which I kind of like.
Yeah.
To me, routine and discipline were very powerful tools to get me on a trajectory.
Yeah.
And now that I'm kind of very sturdy on that trajectory, I don't have a strong need for routines anymore. And I came to a point where my routines were boxing me in a little bit. So I like building something and experimenting and learning to the point where it becomes natural, and then to completely break it down and step away from it again. And also to question all of the things that I do on a regular basis. So for example, I used to always say I have this morning coffee routine. Then I was like, well, who am I without my morning coffee routine? And then I realized I'm an addict without my morning coffee routine. So and then I dismantle it and I pick it apart and I replace it with something else, and then I come back to it, and then, you know, it's so. But to actually answer your question, I definitely have a daily breathing practice, which is not formal anymore. I've gotten to a point where so the most important thing is to do a check-in, a self-check-in.
Yes.
And a lot of times that is just sitting and trying to get out of my head, because as you may notice, my head is always kind of like on, and a way of getting in touch with my body. And then I try to feel into my body, and there's certain things that you can learn to feel, like, for example, heart rate variability, which is something that, well, my Aura Ring measures for me, so I can kind of benchmark it, but I try to feel that. So I take a few breaths and I just get a sense of, does my breathing change slightly between the inhale, or does my heart rate change between the inhale and the exhale when I breathe? And if I take a few fast breaths, does my heart rate go up? And if I stop breathing, does my heart rate slow down? And at what point do I feel the urge to breathe after I stop breathing? Right? Which says something about your CO2 tolerance, for example.
Right. Like
so there's a few kind of, the Bolt score is not my favorite, but I use it. But to me, it's not really the Bolt score anymore, because I just do some breathing practice, and it's a very flowing, a very fluent thing where I speed up, I slow down, I stop, I hold in, I hold out. And if I just do 4 or 5 minutes of that, I know exactly where my body is, how much, you know, whether I'm recovered well enough, if I've slept well enough, whether I need to have breakfast or not, whether I want to fast. And then if I'm not in the place where I want to be, I then ask, how much of this could I change?
Gotcha.
And in which amount of time? And then, for example, like if I notice that my heart rate variability is low and my recovery is low and my body feels kind of sore, I don't have that variability between the inhale and the exhale, then I have the toolbox that I decide from. So, for example, sometimes I do this coherent style breathing where I breathe in a very specific rhythm. One thing I love doing is chanting. So taking an inhale and lengthening my exhale as much as I can. Doing rounds of superventilation with breath holds in the Wim Hof method kind of style, or in different styles. And then I work with my breath for 10 to 15 minutes. And I like to do that in the morning as soon as possible. Another thing that's absolutely fundamental for me is, as soon as I get up and I do anything, I make sure I get daylight into my eyes. And I've been doing that for about 2 years. It's one of my experiments, is I started to kind of put together almost like a light diet. to ask myself, which kinds of light am I getting in which part of the day? And luckily now it's getting really popular because the science is really catching up on this. And in the
Right.
biohacking community about 2 or 3 years ago, this principle of photo biomodulation, which sounds really cool,
Yeah.
which basically means changing the way the light you see, so you change your biological setting. Was very, very always there with the blue blockers, and started wearing blue blockers like 7 years ago when they still only made like the most ridiculous goggles.
I know. I used to tease, but now I wear it too. You know, I remember actually, I think it was Daniel Cortez. And actually, it might have actually been when we were in Colorado. And he would wear those, and I was like, I don't know about that stuff. And then, you know, about a year later, I bought a pair. So
and around that time, I was and I always used to like show them at lectures and be like, these are all the benefits, and they also work great as a contraception.
Yeah,
so it's funny. And now, I mean, the most important thing is like even before. I don't know if it's before breathing, but at least at the same level of breathing, there's sunlight. And sunlight is just so incredibly foundational. And it's another one of those things where we've learned like, oh, don't go into the sun and be careful and put chemicals on your body to stay away from the sun. Like the only reason we need to wear sunscreen is because we spent like 50 weeks inside under fake light, which is damaging to our health and our skin. And then we have 2 weeks of holiday and we fucking go into the heat of the sun every single day for hours, and it destroys you. Yeah. Then of course the sun is a deadly laser, right? And however, like if you get accustomed, this is also one of the reasons why I'm outside right now. I'm outside whenever I can. And one of the great things that the Wim Hof method brought me is that I would be outside, barely dressed most of the year.
Yeah, exactly.
and get sunlight, right? So and not, it doesn't have to be direct sunlight, but daylight, the right kind of the spectrum at the right time. So as soon as I wake up, I want to get daylight into my eyes. I drink at least a liter of water. Like I hydrate a lot.
Okay.
I do my breathing practice before that or after that, depending, or it also depends. Like if my daughter wakes me up and we're late for school, then it's a
dad life
story.
Right? Dad life, it changes things.
Yeah,
you've got to be
true. But then even then, like I've been trying to make a point of this, where if my daughter wakes up, and usually I carry her down the stairs, and she can walk down the stairs, but she's my baby girl, she wants to be carried, and then I hug her, and we have like this direct skin contact, which I've kept going every day that I have with her of her life, direct skin contact. And then I just open the door, and then she feels a little bit cold. She goes, oh, it's cold outside. And I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna warm you up. So we both feel a little bit of that cold air. We get some sunlight in our face and our skin, and then we go about our daily rituals. So it's kind of what I try to do as a routine in that sense is the core things. I always have a breath practice. I always make sure I get daylight, especially in the morning. And in the evenings. And I always move, some kind of movement. And sometimes it's super intense, strongman style strength training. Sometimes it's a run. Sometimes it's stretching. But I make sure that I get all of that in. And then the fourth very important thing that I do every day is something random creative. So for example, I've recently taken the flute, the native Indian flute, the bansuri. And it's a trip, and it's a really and that's a breathing practice in itself. It's creative. It doesn't make any sense. There's absolutely no reason why a grown-ass Dutch man would learn to play this flute, but that's why I'm doing it. And like I've learned to juggle torches. At one point I was learning knife throwing, and I just want to make sure that I always do something that is not productive, that has no goal, that it doesn't have to have, it's not a biohack, it's not optimizing my health, it's just doing something for the random joy of doing something random. It's a very important thing to me. All
right. Those all sound awesome. Now, be honest. What's a bad habit that you have that you would like to break? Do you have any left?
Yeah. Oh, definitely.
Okay.
No, I have.
Exactly.
I have them.
Spill it.
The worst one.
Yeah, give me the worst one. I mean,
the worst one is my social media. Behavior.
Guilty. Guilty.
Yeah. Well, the problem is that my business runs on it. Right?
Exactly.
And I have a very, I kind of like say, like I saw in somebody's LinkedIn bio, recovering type A. And that's kind of me. I'm recovering from a life where productivity is the purpose of my life, which was not healthy at all. And the difficulty is that there's always something to do online. And it's not like
Yeah.
well, sometimes
Yeah.
like the worst thing is when I go into my Instagram account to answer messages, because I really want to be of service. So people ask me questions, I
Yeah.
respond. I try to, like, every day I sit down and I try to deliver high quality content to this platform.
Mhm.
And I'd like to say that that's where it stops. But then when I'm done, I go, oh, wait, let me check this thing. Oh, look at that
Oh,
cute
yeah.
puppy. And like,
Oh,
oh, this
yeah.
is an interesting little thing. And you go down that. And then like 20 minutes later, I'm like, oh, wait, no, it's gone. And I have to like put the phone down and walk away. And it's difficult because it's in between that. Like, for example, I don't watch TV. I used to watch TV. I used to like binge watch shows, and it wasn't good for me. But I could completely, like, I can take the TV out of my house. I can like not ever open any of the streaming services and never watch a series or a movie again.
Did you not see Tiger King? You didn't see Tiger King?
No.
Oh my God.
No.
Yeah.
I did not. I didn't watch.
How will you live? How will you live
will
without watching Tiger King? You know?
Exactly. No, and this is just like, I like watching the news. I have no idea. Like, this is one of the most toxic things that I think a lot of people do without realizing is watching the news and staying updated.
I've been shamed before for not watching the news.
Yeah.
And I'm like, geez, you know, it's not like I'm, you know, burying my head in the sand, but, you know, after a minute, you can tell, seems like they're repeating the same bad news over and over again. And, you know, so-and-so said this stupid thing, or, you know, there was.
I'm pretty sure that watching the
behavior.
news consistently and believing everything they say is putting your head in the sand.
Well, that's
it's
true.
Like,
that's a great point.
Let me not ask any questions. Let me just believe whatever they tell me and not think about it. And
I'm always reminded of Mark Twain, who said that if you read the news, or what is it? If you don't read the news, you're uninformed. But if you read the news, you're misinformed. So, you know, it's kind of right there. Because I mean, what happens a lot of times, I'll talk to people, and it's just like, if I'm not really in that narrative of whatever news narrative they're into, it's like, man, I can't believe. I'm like, I'm so sorry, I guess. I don't know. But yeah, that's a bad habit. When it comes to binge watching TV shows, occasionally that's something that I'll do. So I did watch Tiger King, and that's.
Well, the difference is, of course, whether it's a fully conscious choice and you're doing it because you know you're doing it.
Right.
And it's like going out for a night of drinking, which is actually, I never do that anymore. I just really don't enjoy alcohol anymore. But this is kind of like people, another funny thing, like I lecture about health and lifestyle.
Right.
And especially when I'm in front of normal people and not my biohacking weirdo spiritual people crowd.
Right.
There's always somebody goes like, wait, but you do drink alcohol every now and then, right? And they want to make sure like you don't, like, you can't be that much of a horrible person that you never drink a beer.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting that I have to kind of defend not drinking a beer. And because people, they really have this, but then I also always tell them, like, I don't have anything against it. It's just absolutely not for me. There's no way for me to enjoy alcohol in this phase of my life, and I've had plenty of experience with enjoying it. But then I kind of also have to tell people, like, it's all about the behavior and not about the substance. And what I like to do is kind of tell people this difference of, like, you can, and especially because I speak about, a little bee passed the camera. That was cool.
Oh, cool.
Especially because I'm known as a breathing specialist, you know, and I tell people, and then I kind of sometimes go into this discussion of, like, is there a healthy way to smoke a cigarette? And people are like, what is he saying? Where is he going with this? Because apparently, like, if I don't go out for a few beers, and even if you're like a 40-year-old established person in the corporate world and whatever, and you go out for drinks with your colleagues, you have 3 too many, you end up kind of like puking on the street, your colleagues kind of like make selfies with you, you're like, cool, you had a few too many, you're like, oh, what a fun guy, right? That's all good. And then imagine, like, but then, for example, one cigarette is like the worst thing ever.
Oh my God, yeah.
What I like to, I'm actually writing in my next book, I'm writing this chapter about the self-love cigarette and the self-hate broccoli, where I know people who are frantically, like, obsessively eating healthy foods. But if you're frantically and obsessively eating a healthy food, it's not that much of a big difference between frantically and obsessively eating unhealthy food. Like if the behavior, if the how and the why are toxic and damaging and unhealthy, then whether it's a broccoli or candy is just, it's a detail. Because the pattern is self-hate, the pattern is self-destructiveness. And I've seen, like I used in education, I used to do a little bit of guidance counseling every now and then with kids with eating disorders, and they would like come from a period of eating junk food obsessively to kind of like push down their emotions. Then they would go bulimic as kind of like a counter thing, which was self-hate and obsessive. And then they would starve themselves, which was self-hate and obsessive. And then later on, they'd be like, no, but I work out every day and I only eat healthy foods and I eat enough, which is still self-hate and obsessive. And I'm like, what has really changed?
You'll see this also with positivity, things that we would encourage a person to do, right? Positive self-talk, but you'll see a person, it's almost in a self-loathing way, do positive self-talk, and they'll performatively say it to you. No, I say this and this and this, and this is what I say. I don't say this word anymore. And it's just to this point where it's like almost like a robot you're talking to. And I'm like, hey man, I just.
Yeah, it's like this toxic positivity of like good vibes only. And but then again, like if you look at the other side, like good friends of mine, they don't smoke, either of them, and when they meet, they share a cigarette. It's their ritual. They don't see each other often. It's like we see each other once every few months, and we have a thing. And when we see each other, we hug, we have a conversation, and we have a cigarette and a whiskey or whatever. And it's like that one little. It's a ritual. It is that moment when we decide to both step into the same state with the same tool. And we sync up and we have this deep moment of complete bromance and full on love and enjoyment in the present moment. Wow, what an amazing moment we share together. Then sure, that cigarette will do damage to your lungs on like a physiological level. And every sip of alcohol you take does some kind of damage to your gut microbiome. And every time you drink a Diet Coke, the aspartame will harm you in some way. And every time you spend a little bit too much time in the sun, it will harm you in some way, right? And at the same time, every time you watch the news or you like spend an hour. I remember I was in this food place when the first times I came to the US, and our news and commercials are different, right? And I was just like waiting for a meal for half an hour, and I spent 20 minutes looking at Fox News, then I spent 10 minutes watching commercials for pharmaceutical. We don't have commercials. We don't have ads for medication. That's not, no, it's illegal.
Well,
for good reason.
It's illegal in the United States. I remember when they started that. So it's illegal for us to have cigarette ads. And I think I haven't seen an alcohol commercial in a long time, because those are the bad things, right? But we can have 5 back-to-back commercials, and then the first part, you see the people and they're having a great day, and then it's just a long list of side effects. At the very end, you may have this, you may have this, you may have this, you may have this,
like,
and that's the commercial. But they're happy.
This medication could help you sleep 5 minutes longer, but also your nose may fall off. And
internal bleeding. You probably won't get as much sleep. And you're nervous and all these things. And it's really amazing how that's taken over.
Well, and then I was like, listen, I'm pretty sure that if I would have skipped this half hour of watching the news and watching these commercials, and instead I would have smoked a cigarette, my health would have been in a better place. Now, again, like the only reason, like I'm not suggesting anybody smokes a cigarette. Absolutely not. The point is that I use the cigarette because the cigarette we have chosen to be the bad guy, and then we're not really questioning whether now it's about the cigarette being evil, but no, it's the behavior that makes it bad.
Well, it's so much simpler to live in that 2-dimensional world, right? Where this is a bad thing, this is a good thing, never shall they ever cross, and you can't do a good thing badly or a bad thing and it's always these polar opposites. It's so much simpler to live that way. But you really have to think about your motivation, where you are psychologically. Why am I doing this? Because we all know that we can punish ourselves with broccoli. I love that example, and Yeah, I mean,
And it's
obviously,
funny because a lot of like kids get punished with broccoli, literally.
that's true. That's
Like,
true. It's like, oh, you're gonna have to eat broccoli. I remember
yeah,
I used to get punished with exercise. So I learned to hate exercise. You know, I kind of had that. I don't know if you ever played any sports, but at least
yeah,
in the United States and in Indiana. So I live in Indiana. I don't know if you've probably never heard of Bobby Knight. He's this amazing basketball coach, and he was known for like throwing things on the court and just getting angry and just, you know, screaming and stuff. And so all of the coaches in Indiana, they're like, well, if that's what coaches do, you know, so all of the, you know, the little high school coaches, they were like, well, I'm going to throw some. So that was just kind of how I was introduced to sports. I was like, okay, the coaches are always angry. And anytime I mess up, I've got to exercise. So exercise must be this bad, you know,
yeah.
punishment. And of course, then, you know, my first 30 years of life were exercise as minimal as possible, you know, and so I just learned to not like it anymore. And then
Now, how'd you get so buff, man?
oh, dude, it's all the roids. I recently I got accused of doing steroids, and it was like the best day of my life. I was like, seriously?
Aw, thank
Oh,
you.
thanks. You know, so I'm just like flexing everywhere I go. I'm like, people think I'm on roids, man. So I am.
Look at the steroids. I get the steroids in my muscles.
You're so much better at Arnold than I am. I think it's the slight Dutch accent. I've got like a country boy American accent, so it's kind of a harder thing for me to get. But I do the, you know, I got a little bit of an accent there.
The country boy. Yeah.
Well, hey, Casper, I really appreciate you being on my podcast and my YouTube channel, and yeah, I'm a huge fan, and I really appreciate everything you've been doing, and I'm looking forward to a new book. I just teased that out of you. That's my interviewing skills. You just said that you're writing a book. So so any other hints about this book, or we're just going to leave it kind of in the ether? Any idea of when this book will be out or what it'll be about?
It's difficult right now because I had all these ideas about what I wanted to write, and then I started, and I was like, I'm not sure if that's the thing. So I'm very much in an open state right now, where I have 2 or 3 ideas that could be entire books.
I know exactly how that feels. Yeah.
Yeah. So what I'm doing now is just I'm studying where it can be of most service.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like maybe it's up to me to write a really awesome, extensive book about breathing specifically. And then James Nestor's book came out, and I was like, boom,
Right.
I could have never done it that good. That is
Right.
such a good book. So that I was like, okay, cool. So I don't have to write that breath book. It's funny because like he's such a good author, such a
Right.
good book. But I'm currently really wanting to. I always feel like a responsibility to put a lot of the stuff out there that I've been working on. So, and then that's why I started this masterclass.
Yeah.
And a lot of the work on the nervous system, reading the nervous system, kind of restoring function, and understanding how to self-regulate based on science. And this is something I really want to write about. And in the first setting now, I'm actually, I was going to start writing like kind of almost like full time 2 months ago. And instead of that, I actually decided to build out this masterclass with a whole bunch of, I've recorded up to 10 hours of lectures on,
Oh, wow.
Online lectures about breathing, about chemoregulation, about, nervous system. So,
Nice.
and then once I have that done, once I have everything recorded, then I'm going to see what of that would be most of service in a book form, and kind of take it from there. But I really want to talk about these principles that are less mental. My first book was very mental,
Right.
Mind Lift. It's very about mental and mindset. And now I want to write more about the body, about the emotional side of things, and that whole connection. So, anyway,
That's exciting.
I have some ideas.
I'll be looking forward to reading
and
it.
I kind of want to, I have one book idea that is more of, it's more of a comedy style book. Like almost like a satirical biohacking book.
Oh, nice.
So anyway, I have some plans. Those are more teasers.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Well, we'll be looking forward to that. So how can people find you and sign up for all your cool stuff? And
best place to find me is on Instagram right now.
Okay.
So at Kasper's Focus, KaspersFocus.
I will have it in the link below.
Oh, great. Yeah, and mindlift.com is my website with all of my retreats and classes and everything that I'm doing.
All right. Well, thanks so much. Thanks so much for being here. I appreciate it. And guys, thanks for watching. If you have not liked and subscribed to this channel, like, what are you doing? And
come on, do it now.
Do it now. Okay. Anyway. All right, guys. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time.
Oh, yeah.